job. But one thing is that a lot of scientists still think that science communication is explaining the facts, while in research we have a much broader view. And I think we need to get that out there. So it's not to blame on the scientists who don't know it, but on the broader community. And for instance, the exponential graph, there was a really interesting study that used exponential graphs and linear graphs to inform people about COVID. And then checked, like, do they understand things? Are they more likely to follow measures? And it turned out that on all the criteria they had, a linear graph would work better. And still, many scientists were using the exponential graphs, and so were many science communicators and science journalists, while there was clear research showing that this was a bad idea. So that bugs me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And we will be able to come back to this, I think, later on. So I move on to David Lodder. As I said, you work at the European Commission's DG, or Directorate General for Research and Innovation, where you are in charge of communicating issues that are really topical for our conference, such as open science, citizen science, and science communication, among others. I know you have also worked at the permanent representation in the Netherlands, the Commission's permanent representation, where you've had a more national and local audience in mind. So what do you think are the main challenges for science communication?
Yes, many thanks for the invitation, first of all, and I found it amazing to hear the challenges from the public and from the participants just now, many of them resonating with what we are facing also in communication on policy, because one of the challenges is always to get complexity in a strategic way to a certain target audience, right? That's very difficult with research. That's very difficult when it comes to policy, which again is a very complex topic that you need to translate depending on who you're talking to. Well, I'm lucky enough to have these two together, science and policy, so it's a double challenge. I think there are three interconnected challenges that are very important to mention. One is trust, which was mentioned also in the previous session. One is strategy, and one is cooperation. And these three all have to work together. And maybe to directly react on what one of the participants said, that you were told maybe a journalist should do this, you do your science. I think that is absolutely wrong. And there is actual research to also show that. If you look at the Eurobarometer, that was a special Eurobarometer on science and innovation, came out earlier this year, I think. It showed that if you look at trust in science and who should communicate it, there's a far majority that trust you, scientists, much more than me, working for policy, and much more than journalists. So to empower researchers is extremely important, and there comes the strategy, and that's something that, again, I will make that parallel often with communicating about policy. There needs to be strategy behind the communication. What we often see is that researchers have beautiful communication products, say it a video or a podcast, or they make that themselves, which takes a lot of time, effort, often even on costs. But if there's no clear strategy on which channels to use, which target audience to reach, then the effect and the impact of such communication can get lost, which is something that we are working and me personally, very hard on at the Commission to strengthen. And then, but we will talk about that you have to look at who can I cooperate with? Which science communication channels are the ones that I need to reach this specific audience? And that's where the cooperation comes in. So I think these three elements are the ones that we're working all together very hard on, but need some extra effort and cooperation in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. So next we will move to Svetla Tanova, who is coordinator of the European Science Media Hub. And the European Science Media Hub is part of the European Parliament and has been running since the end of 2017, if I'm right. You also have a journalist background. And since the European Science Media Hub may not be well known to everybody here in the audience, could you please very briefly also explain what it is, in addition to your answer to my question? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for this opportunity to present the Science Media Hub in the European Parliament in the STOA panel. And I'm very happy also to be here to this great conference. Thanks to the organizers physical event, but also, of course, welcome to the online audience. Yes, in the European Parliament, 4 years ago, the panel for the future of science and technology, this is a panel composed of 27 members of the European Parliament, decided to start this special project on science communication because exactly based on all these challenges we have been speaking about, it was clear that we have to cooperate better, policymakers, scientists, and media makers and journalists. So the idea was to be a platform for dialogue among them, to reach out to science journalists, especially in the digital era, where we see that science journalism is decreasing. The role as gatekeeper of science journalism in science communication is decreasing, and we are, as citizens, are facing a lot of other actors, influencers, especially on social media. So how to tackle the disinformation, misinformation in science is also very important part of our work. And that's why we organize many trainings, workshops with science journalists all around Europe. This is really our main goal, to go out a little bit outside the Brussels bubble and to meet science journalists from different member states and to see how they struggle, because also in this area we have countries where science journalism and science communication are not so well developed, and the discussion is really still quite new.
Any main challenges besides what you just said for science communication on the European level?
Yes, the main challenge is connected to the change of our whole information ecosystem in the last 15, 20 years. I think that the way how, in general, political or science communication is now spread on social media, of course, with the business model based on attention, it's a very challenging topic that we have to face all and to have to tackle all together.
Okay, thank you. So our fourth panelist today is, as I said, Markus Weißkopf, Managing Director of Wissenschaft in Dialog. You have initiated several new formats in science communication, and you also initiated the German version of the Science Barometer. And I know you have been leading UC, which is the European Science Engagement Association, several years.
Yes, thank you. It's a bit hard to be the last in the line, and we already heard so many challenges. But maybe, yeah, coming back to the science barometer, because I think it's one instrument for really better analyzing what are real problems and what are the target audiences, for example, we have to speak to. And if it comes to, for example, well, people who do not trust or are undecided if we can trust science or not, it's really important that we know who are these people, yeah? And then develop the right measures for targeting for communicating with them. And this is also something that really lacks. So it comes to strategy. So have better analysis of what are the real problems, what are real goals, and then develop a strategy together, collaborate on all the actors know their role, and then initiate the right measures to really get in a dialogue with those people and speak to them. And I mean, we have seen it in the pandemic, for example, when it comes to vaccination. And we've seen that we don't reach certain people because we are still sort of, in a deficit model at some point. So, and most of the people think, yeah, we only have to get the information out, and then there will be somebody out there and getting the information somehow. And this is not true. We have to go to the people, and this is one main challenge. And maybe one thing we can use for getting into dialogue, better dialogue with the people, is also motivating young scientists, for example, who are active in social media, for example, who do those videos. So yeah, we have to train them. We have to tell them which channels they can use, but we also have to motivate them that they go out and speak to the people, that they go into the dialogue. We have to we need to have some fun in science communication and not only talking about impact and strategy. That's really important, but we also need to have some fun. We also need to have some motivation. We need to have some recognition in their careers. And that's also something that is really lacking in the scientific system. So if I go out as a scientist and talk to the people, well, that is not recognized by the scientific system. Papers are recognized and valued by the scientific system, but not science communication.
Yeah, I think by that maybe you answer partly one of my follow-up questions, because you talked about motivation. So do you already have an idea of how scientists could be motivated? That maybe you just said, you gave part of the explanation, but do you know already what could be done?
Yes, I mean, role models are very important. So the older scientists, senior scientists, they have to be good role models for the younger ones. And we need, well, all those things we can initiate, like the prizes for science communication. But it's also something we have to include in, if it gets to jobs in science, that science communication activities are recognized for getting a job, for getting a professorship.
Anybody else who want to comment? I think, yes, Ionica, please.
So in the Netherlands, I realized when we were preparing, we are doing not so bad compared to other countries. So the recognition and reward movement is going on quite strongly. And what I really like to emphasize is that not every scientist should do this. So I think it's very dangerous if we're talking about broadening careers to ask that all scientists do all different aspects. And so what we see, I think, is that lots of young researchers are motivated for doing science communication, but have very little support. So there is no support, there is no funding, there is no training. And quite often when it's young people, so who are PhDs, they don't need a lot of money to do things. So if there are some ways to give them small startup grants, or just there is one supervisor who says, go ahead, do this, it's great, and just offer them good training, I think that would already change so much.
David, please.
Two examples that we do from the part of the European Commission, from the Director General for Research and Innovation, is one thing focused on youngsters. It is the European Union Contest for Young Scientists this year in Leiden. It will take place where we ask young scientists that have participated in their own national competitions to come all together. It's also a networking for them and for their future careers, to come for an international jury and present their research. What is so important about this, and I am then sent to make nice videos of that and make sure that that gets reported in the press, etc. What's so important, and I think what you already said, is that by motivating these young scientists and showing how fun it can be to then see yourself in the news, your national broadcaster, to have a journalist interview you, how proud you can be on your research, how far it can reach if you get the right partners to support you. I think that really motivates them also later on to do this, because I can also imagine, I don't know, but that it's very difficult if you have not received any training, you have been focusing on your research, to all of a sudden, when you're somewhere in your 30s being told go stand for a big group and talk, or go to a journalist. So that's very important. And the other thing that we're also doing now with the European Research Council is the Public Engagement with Research Award. So that is even a much more concrete on public engagement, and reward scientists who do the extra mile. And they often do that extra mile out of their own accord. I think that's very important that recognition is there. And what we've seen from all the applications is that there are a lot of very good things happening. That's even sometimes we are all not aware of. So it's very good.
But it shouldn't be the extra mile. It should be included in their job. That would be the goal for future. So that it's not additional to what they do in their daily works, but it's included in their daily work. So, and they have the time for it.
But even then, the ones that do the extra mile on top of that.
Thank you. I encourage you to think about questions here in the audience, and also for our online participants to post questions in the chat. But I have another question for you that I would like to bring up first. And this will be actually kind of a double question, because I wonder if you can think of any best practice examples of science communication around Europe, and also if you can reflect on how these potentially could be transferred to a European context. Tricky question when you ask to, please, Svetla.
This is really tricky because I'm afraid it is always very difficult to give a concrete example. There are so many amazing initiatives around, and starting from science slams and very innovative formats, YouTubers. That's why I would prefer not to give concrete example, but to focus more general on projects which are trying to enhance science literacy for audiences. Because it is so important to understand, and again in the pandemic we saw this, to understand how science works. It seems to be very, very technical, very complex, but we saw again in the Corona crisis, people are ready to take this time to listen a little bit longer podcasts, to read a little bit longer articles, but also to understand some more complex issues. I think we very often try to oversimplify things for our audiences, which is not necessary sometimes. If we try to explain how in the end also science works with uncertainty, or where are the limitations, how evidence is changing, I think this will be very important for the science communication in general. So my idea is that we of course all make promotion, communicate about our institutions, our academia, our research institutions. But if we don't forget that we communicate also science, maybe even more important.
You want to come in, Ionica?
Yes, well, yeah, I agree with the danger of mentioning concrete examples and also of having like a one format. So a colleague of mine in the Netherlands likes to say in science communication, it should be 1,000 flowers that are blooming. And I think that is true. You need to do very different things. But still, I would be okay with naming one project I really like. I'm hoping I'm describing it correctly because I'm not in it, but it was from Open Science Hubs. So Pedro, if I'm saying it incorrectly. So the idea was to work from local communities and bring the science that they need. And they had just started when Corona broke out. And so they skipped all the plans they had to do fun stuff with STEM in schools, but instead they spent time on helping communities to make masks and to help people to connect when they didn't have internet at home. And I thought this was really, it's not typical science communication. You're not bringing knowledge, but you're actually servicing communities that you're part of. And I thought that was something that we could do more often to go from the questions that people really have.
Mm-hmm.
Let me say that I'm here on private title before I start naming concrete individual projects and examples. We had under Horizon 2020, we had 8 fantastic projects on citizen science, and I would never make an order between them, but I will mention one of them, which was the Tresca project at the start, where we worked together, or the Erasmus Rotterdam University was the leader of that coalition that worked with Kurzgesagt, that you all probably very well know, on a very interesting project to see how we can improve science communication, to see what works, what types of messaging work, what types of productions work. And there were very interesting results that, for example, they made a video. Researchers looked at how people reacted to that in focus groups, that for the authority of a researcher, it is actually not good to become very emotional or to talk a lot about what has to be done. No, it's actually good to stay more on the facts, which is a very important finding, because often in communication, we do talk about storytelling, about being emotional, but that works in certain contexts. And if you have certain communication objectives that you want to achieve. So that was also for us, and I think for everyone from the project, a very interesting find as well. And that comes back to what you said as well, that they made a video that was called originally, "We lied to you and we'll do it again." Maybe some of you saw it. That's not something that we at the European Union level like to say too often or at all. But the interesting thing, and the thing they tried to mention, is that they said, yes, we are simplifying things when we do science communication. We're not going to explain you quantum physics in all its details and all it, because then all of you would either fall asleep or faint. So what they say is we start simple and then we build on that. Well, that video did insanely good, which is very, I think, cool if you take into account that it was a video about science communication. So a great project. Maybe one quick other thing is also that we have a Horizon magazine that some of you might know, which is the European Union magazine for research and innovation, where we very purposefully give the word to scientists. So there are thematic articles. Normally every day there's a new article where researchers can speak, where they can talk about what they're doing. So really giving the floor to researchers. And I think that's very important that we all stay away from there, from the policies perspective. It's journalists interviewing scientists and giving them a platform to reach a very large audience. And I think those type of initiatives are very good and to spread across Europe. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody wants to comment? Yes, Markus,
Maybe
please.
building on your first example, David. There's this new initiative by the Volkswagen Stiftung in Germany. You also mentioned it, Ionica. And their practitioners and researchers build their centers together on a certain topic. And when there is actual science communication on a certain topic, but there's also research on this science communication. And so they always learn from it and develop it further. And I think that could also be a blueprint for funding, for example, on a European level. I mean, we have to see it and follow it, how it develops, but I think it's quite an interesting approach.
Mm. Do you agree, the others? I mean, could this be to work more on the topical side, and could that find traction on the EU level, you think?
Yeah, so I think these new centers are doing both. So there are centers that are really about the rhetorics and artificial intelligence. So then it's really on a topic, but there's also a more general one about visualizations. So I think you can bring it together, but I think the key, and actually what you also said, you also want to study what works. So I also was in a Norwegian project very similar to the one you said, where you saw that videos from the World Health Organization were very trustworthy and very informative, but no one watched them. So if you go down out, you know, that's what's so amazing about Kurzgesagt. They make something that's informative and people actually watch it. So I think more of these collaborations where it's people bringing in the content, people studying how to make the content reach the public, and communicators who know how to actually do this. I think that's really a good way to go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would like to slightly change the topic a little bit and move to the issue of funding, because that has been brought up several times also during the day. So we have talked about the projectification of science communication. So what is your opinion on the current state of funding for science communication on the European level?
Well, I have to say that as a communication officer, it's very difficult for me to answer that, because the thing that I do is communicate about science at the European level, about policy. What's good to say is that there are a few important things happening at the European level in terms of priorities. One of them is open science, which is also a very important part of science communication. So we launched in April the platform turned one, Open Research Europe, that many of you will know, especially the researchers. At least I hope, otherwise I did a bad job in communicating it. But which is the first open access publishing platform for the EU. So every beneficiary from Horizon Europe funds, and Horizon 2020 before, can publish there for free in full open access, which is also an obligation under Horizon Europe, so the current research innovation funding program. And that open science, we're going to build on much more. The nice thing is that it goes further, that platform, than just open access publishing. There's also a very effective communication going around it, where we, for example, post blogs, interviews with the researchers that are posting there. There's an own Twitter account. So the science communication is very much woven in there. Another important initiative, and the call just closed, and I remember hearing it also in the previous discussion, is on the Science Communication Competence Center, which is the intention is that it will do a lot of what has been discussed here. So 2 main goals: bringing together expertise, research, what has been done, which best practices, etc., so that there is a European place where every European scientist can come to learn how can I best communicate. And the second goal, also very important, is to create networks. So it's really to bring people together, to provide training, etc. So I think that competency center will really, is part now of Horizon Europe funding, will really answer a lot of the questions that were raised and hopefully bring solutions to those challenges.
Is there already an idea from or a vision from the Commission side on what will happen after? I mean, is this something that perhaps should be permanent on a European or national level?
So I'm going to base myself safely on the call text of the request for proposals, which indeed very clearly indicates that the idea is that this will go on also after the initial period. So that should also be part of the proposals that are now being evaluated, or soon will be evaluated, to see how legacy can be guaranteed. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think it's time now to move up to to open up the floor. That was what I wanted to say, to questions from you. So, Daniel, have we received any questions from the chat already?
Yes, there's one.
Okay.
Can you switch on the microphone?
I think it's number 1.
Yeah, now it's working. So that the person who posed the question can also hear me posing the question. Steve, I think it is, would like to know how far we need to go with the standardization of SciComm. And what he means is lots of projects aim to share insights, and that is great. But every situation probably needs a slightly different approach depending on the audience and the context and so on. Yeah, so what's your take on that? How much does standardization of SciComm probably actually stand in the way to get to where we want to go?
Anybody wants to? Yeah, Ionica, you want to start?
Yeah, I was thinking also earlier during conversations, if you make a parallel with research, like, do you want to standardize what are research projects? I'm like, no, but we do have quality standards. We can say like, oh, this is a good project and this isn't. So I think that is what we should hope for. When we look at common language and quality standards, we want to have some standards, like just informing your neighbor and 2 friends maybe isn't a high quality project. So you can say you need to think about your goals and your target group, and then you need to think of methods that fit those. And it's the same with a research project. You need to think of good research questions, and then you think of the methods that are best for answering them. So I think you need to standardize more the way we think about them for a setup, and then not standardize how to do them at all, because it will be very different for different goals.
Yeah, I think you have a large variety of projects, and that it's good, but we also need some standardization in terms of setting up goals, impact, and so on, but also maybe a code of conduct on transparency, for example. How transparent are we about financial contributions in some projects, or some conflicts of interest? And so that would be good to have this code of conduct also on a European level. We try to we established a code of conduct in Germany 2015. And I think this really helps in discussions, and this really also helps practitioners and also researchers in their projects. We also have a checklist so that it's practicable in the daily, everyday life.
Okay, Interesting, thank you. So, do we have a first question from the floor here in the room, please? Yes, can you please also say your name and where you are from, please?
Hello, hi, my name is Julia. I'm based in Brussels. I have a question. You were talking about having fun, and you were especially focusing on having fun for the science communicator, which is great. But I wanted to know if you had any comments on how to get over the public perception that science is boring and stuffy. And yes, what can we do so that as soon as people don't hear the word science, they don't think they're going to get their ear talked off? Thank you.
I can start,
Yes,
maybe. So I once got a training, more than once, but this one stuck with me. And they said very specifically that the boringness of a text or a speech is determined by the amount of words that you cannot draw. And it always stuck with me, and I use it every day in my communication. Because the problem is often, I don't think actually that many people think that science is stuffy. Or that it's uninteresting. There are many evaluations and research being done that people are very interested in the latest scientific developments and things that are being researched. The problem that we in the policy field also sometimes have is that we tend to talk in very abstract terminology, to stay very close to the facts, but because of that lose sight of what makes a presentation or a text appealing. And the reason why I say things you can draw is because then you take people with you visually. They think of things that you're talking about. Where when I talk about towards a framework for a better research communication compass in Europe, then all of you are now wondering what. So it's very important that you make things tangible with examples, with things you can draw. It doesn't always work. We use often in the innovation landscape now, we talk about unicorns, which is something that we actually shouldn't do because everyone thinks about a horse with a horn running over a rainbow. But in general, this is the way I think to go. And I think that idea that people think science is boring is, I don't think it's often the case. And I definitely think it doesn't have to be the case.
Anybody else who wants to comment on that one?
Maybe we also have to think, I also don't agree that science is boring. I think the problem is more if we find the relevant topics for citizens, because we saw now with the pandemic that once again, people were ready to read about the most complicated expertise from virologists in detail. So obviously, when the topic is relevant, people are not finding that science is boring, and we maybe have to be a little bit more attentive to the topics interesting for our audiences.
And how do we do that? Ionica.
Well, actually, that is happening. So we recently did a study how physics is coming in the news in the Netherlands. And we thought beforehand from a literature, so there is a division in two types of triggers for scientific news. So one is coming from the scientific community. So it's a breakthrough, it's a paper, it's a conference, it's an award, like these scientific news things. And then the other half are the non-scientific triggers. So something's happening in society and a physicist is asked to comment on it. And what we had expected was that for physics, which is an abstract, harder science, that it would be mainly scientific triggers. And it turned out it was actually 50-50 in the news. So half of news about physics is actually triggered by something in society and not coming from within science. And I think that is really where we are already quite at. And of course you bump into people who are not into science. And I also think that's okay. Just like not every scientist should do science communication, not everyone should love science, but people should have enough science communication to make good decisions in their life. They should be able to find information. We're not missionaries, so we don't have to sell it to everyone. I think that's important. If some people are like, I really don't want to know, well, it's okay.
That's where strategy again comes in, because you have to look at, if you're going to communicate about the topic, what do I want to achieve? and with who do I want to, and can I achieve that? That's always the first question, because that will determine how complex your message can be. That will determine which channel you use. And the same with the communication that I do in my everyday work. The first question I always ask after I determine who we want to reach with that is, what's in it for them? Because if you cannot make that link, then people might tune out. The good thing is that I personally really believe that in every scientific field, whether it's frontier research or research on very actual topics like coronavirus, there is something in it for citizens, and there is something that can influence people's life directly, but you have to name that. I think that's very important.
I think we have the question also in the back. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Philip, and I'm from Heidelberg University. I'm very thankful, Ionica, for this comment you just made, that it's really important that not everybody has to be interested in everything, because there's so many things out there, and just because you're so much into whatever protein folding, it's totally okay for someone not to be into that, having something else. And I think this is what a lot of scientists and science communicators often forget. So that's really, thanks a lot. A small disagreement to your previous comment. I think talking to your neighbors can be a very worthwhile approach in reaching other regions. So we are trying to do that. So we see if that works out, but I wouldn't overlook that. And the actual question before I had to make these two comments, I have the impression, I'm sorry, I have the impression that a lot of underlying assumptions, also nobody really made it explicit, is still assuming science as sciences, meaning natural sciences, engineering, and STEM. I think this is dominating implicitly a lot of the science communication landscape. What would your perspectives be on thinking more about social sciences and humanities communication, which then really blurs the boundaries going into advice, because there's no definitive fact you can communicate about whatever this, that's protein folding, but how you see societal processes or how you understand knowledge, like a lot of these very complicated things that someone probably not has a previous interest in, but you really need to make people think, trigger reactions, and how to include that in, well, also in EU-wide initiatives, which also, in my impression, focus a lot on MINT aspects.
Yes. Yeah, so we actually discussed this when we prepared this. So this was one of the things I would have also liked to name at the beginning as a challenge, but we already had so many. But I really see that the field of science communication is really aimed at STEM. So for how many of you are coming from a somewhat STEM or life sciences background? Or maybe I should ask the other way around, who's from the humanities? Oh, that's really, that's impressive. That must, because I think that is really rare. So if you look at science communication, so for instance, we mentioned FameLab today, that is by definition not allowed for humanities or social sciences researchers to participate. It's only for the STEM and medical sciences. So that and also in research, like how in research on how to communicate, it's mainly about the medical, biology, some physics coming in. It is I think it's a problem, but there are institutionalized ways to do this. So one of the Volkswagen centers is actually looking at how to do this for the social sciences and humanities, and we need to do that. But I'm happy there are lots of them here, so we're not that bad.
Also, that I think semantics is important in this, and this is why in our communication at DG Research and Innovation we always talk about research and innovation, not about science, because science is still in the public perception, and you have to take that into account always when you communicate. It's often regarded as a STEM. Now, of course, there was also, and there still is, a policy aspect to this, that there's often a shortage in people who study or work in STEM, which has to be addressed. But very valid comment, and you see now also that in European initiatives, more and more those things are widened. The European Union Contest for Young Scientists I talked about started out only with STEM categories, and now there is also a social sciences and humanities category for the prize. So I think you see that movement very clearly now.
I think for semantics, that's right for sure, but also the visual representation, because when I see a piece of science news, I often see someone in a lab. So that's, and I think that can, I remember from Sweden, for instance, and I think that has happened in other countries. I'm Swedish, that's why. Young children were asked to draw a scientist, and what did they draw? Well, a man in a lab. coat. So we really, this is really something important, I think.
How does one draw a social scientist?
Is it reading, perhaps?
It's a question maybe for the next
Yeah.
panel.
So thank you. Sorry.
And so apart from the underlying, I think it's also a very practical reason. So there is more money in the STEM field. So it's not just a pull from the job market, but also, for instance, there's a lot of money going to quantum research and they spend just 2% on science communication. That means it's huge for the field. While in humanities, if you spend 2% of your big research projects on science communication, well, it's not going to be that big.
Thank you. So, yes, I have another question here on the side, please.
I'm Uwe from Innsbruck. I want to, not a question, but a comment. I don't think so that only science in the purest sense of word is compatible to the public. In my experience, this is much more the humanities. When we do our communication things, the humanities, they always think that they are not in the front, but in every counting, they are in the front of how newspapers or media takes over our press releases, and because many people are, the humanities are much nearer to the people than natural sciences very often.
So where are the science museum about the humanities?
I didn't.
So I think this is really, so it's great that they're picking up, but for instance, in science communication, so science museum about the humanities.
I'm working at a university.
No, but I think in general,
Yes.
in the field, it's great that the media is picking up. It's not, I think it's not true in general, internationally, unfortunately. But I think really when you look at how they are represented in science communication, it's so much less. So
Yeah,
I'm very happy to hear that.
It depends if you can read it or show it in a video or something like that, then humanities are have a good chance. But if you talk about science nights and things like that, then they have many children there and they want to have any hands-on things. And this is not very easy in the humanities. But if you can talk and read and discuss, then humanities are in front, I think.
Yeah, the humanities were very present in the press and also in TV, for example. But I think it's interesting if you watch watching the TV and you see some people from humanities, they are named experts. And if there's somebody from physics, he's a professor. So, so they are not perceived as scientists. So, I mean, in Germany, we say Wissenschaft, so it's the same for everybody, but they're not perceived as researchers, as scientists, they're only perceived as experts. So maybe this is some take on it.
Maybe this is just a thought that came up when you asked where the social science or the humanities museums. I think they're definitely there. They're just not called science museum, because if you go to I can recommend it to everyone here, to the House of European History. Here they had, I'm not sure if it's still on, but they had a really nice exhibition on fake news through the ages. That's all science informed, and it's history, it's political science, it's social sciences. So it's absolutely there, but we simply don't call it a science museum. We call it a history museum.
No,
in
and
this
so
case.
that would be like really nice of institutionalization. That like, why don't they join forces? Because they're dealing with the same problems, and then there's the X side for science musea, and then there's musea about history who are not connected.
Yes, and those musea, they don't show the scientific research process behind the results often. That's my perspective. So in a science center, you see sometimes you can look behind the scenes and you can see the research process behind the results. And in a history museum, you cannot see that. So maybe that is one difference.
Daniel, are there any more questions from the chat? No, there is not. Okay, but I'm quite sure there is a question. Yes, I can see a question in the back, please.
Hi, I wondered we talked a lot about different venues and different disciplines. What's the panel's perspective on non-scientists, non-researchers communicating science?
Anyone?
I can start with an example of science journalist. I mentioned I'm journalist and we work with journalists. Of course, you cannot call science journalist non-expert because this will be the person who will check and select from hundreds of science publications where the science evidence is the best, and we will give it to the audience. So you of course, we have to think of also many other actors nowadays, again, on social media. Yeah, I think we can easily assess if somebody is expert or not.
And I totally agree. So I think a lot of YouTube makers did a better job communicating about Corona than many scientists, and they were both scientifically correct and accurate. But then the thing is, I would call them an expert, even though they're not scientists or researchers or employed. If someone in his ethic is making great videos about science, well, I'm going to say it's an expert. So
I think the key word here again is cooperation. So some people are very natural communicators, or some people have a very large group of followers. So it can be very useful to work together with these people to bring your message out. That doesn't mean that they should create the entire message on a topic they may not be very, or they might not be an expert in. So you can work together and you can check with each other. Okay, that's my message. We've spoken. I've created this story from what you've told me. Does that still resonate with your research results and what you found? So I think that's very important. Communication doesn't always have to be only done by an expert, but it should be checked by an expert.
Yeah, but that leads us to this question. I mean, what do we do in this now other media system we're having? I mean, Massimiliano Bucchi also mentioned it earlier today. So how can we have a quality check when science communication comes from people who do not work in trusted institutions, such as a scientific institution or a newspaper, for example? So can we have some guidance in those areas on YouTube, on TikTok, and which is even more difficult to evaluate for me, for example? So that is one key question for the future, I think.
Thank you. I would like to come back a bit to the theme of this panel on the institutionalization of European science communication. I mean, there are many organizations and we can take up many different roles also in this ecosystem. So what do you think makes the most sense to do at different levels? I mean, we have the European level, the national level, and also local regional levels.
Maybe just to start,
I
think exactly the exchange from many different actors is very important. And I saw recently the Science Engagement Association. They started a platform with very concrete toolboxes, examples, how to do science communication. I think exactly this best practices are very important. Once again, also in view with countries or groups of society who are not necessarily very privileged to develop science communication. This would be for me very important for European level, but of course I hope everybody agrees that it should not be the European Commission or the European Parliament. It should be not the European institution imposing a kind of science communication standards or institute or a kind of institution. This should come from you, from scientists, researchers, communicators from Europe. So you have, of course, to agree on code of conduct or of standards, and the dialogue should start from there, bottom up.
Anyone else? Markus?
Yeah, maybe adding to this, I mean, I think it's good to collect knowledge on a European level, to provide knowledge on a European level on best practice, but also evidence we collect in research on science communication. That would be good to provide it on a European level because it's the same for all. So yeah, there are cultural differences, but we can use it all over Europe. And when it comes to concrete activities, so they should be done on a local or regional level for sure. So because people relate to their scientists, to their researchers from their universities, that's what as far as I can see. So, and we should now discuss what makes sense on a European level, what makes sense on a national level, and what has to be on a regional and local level.
It's nice to give an example of this now, because Leiden is the European City of Science this year. They're organizing 265 days of events and of science communication, basically. There's every morning even a radio show with different professors. And with, so this is really good. And we're working together on this, because the contest, two contests I mentioned before, but also ESOF, so the Euro in Science Open Forum, which is the largest research conference in Europe, is organized in Leiden. So we provide funding for these large events, and then we work together for them to implement it on the ground, because we cannot do that from here. You need people that understand the people in Leiden, in the Netherlands, to do that implementation and really reach out to people in the neighborhoods, what they're, for example, doing very effectively. So I think it's a good example, again, of cooperation of the European level with the regional and the local level, because in the end, it's easiest for them to find the researchers that appeal to the people there. That would be difficult for us to do in 27 member states and a whole lot of cities.
Thank you. We are actually arriving to the end of this panel. I feel sorry to interrupt this incredibly interesting discussion. It's been a pleasure. I wanted to ask you a final question, and also if I can also ask you to be to the point, so to answer quite briefly. So what is your personal idea of an ideal European SciComm landscape in 5 years from now? If I start with you, Svetla, please.
Very short, more European, more science-based, and more communication. So European science communication.
Okay, thank you. David, please.
For me, and I know I'm repeating myself, but that's a good communication practice. It's really on cooperation, working together. And not only between different levels, European, local, regional, but also between scientific disciplines, between policy and research, with industry. I think if we can work together to build that communication, that would be amazing.
Ionica, please.
I agree. And the field is so spread out with people in very different subdisciplines and ways. So what would be my ideal landscape is to have something like Wissenschaft and Dialog in every separate country, and then have an overarching structure where all these people meet each other, because not every researcher needs to get to the European level, but you need to be in contact with people who are. So that would be my ideal.
Thank you. And Markus.
Yeah, that would be great to have so many sister organizations in Europe. I mean, we already have Switzerland and Sweden, and so many should follow. I know that some countries are already discussing it, so that would be great to have more institutions like ours in the European landscape. Yeah, building a European ecosystem, that would be nice. And so that is connected on a local, national, and European level. Connected and cooperative. I think that is something we really have to learn, and we really have to practice, not only talk, but practice it. That would be good. And yeah, more effective and more evidence-based. I think that that should be something we should be aiming for, and guided by also common values and by maybe a more common conduct, code of conduct. That would be great. Common values such as transparency and openness and cooperation. So that's what I like to see in 5 years.
Okay. So with this, I would like to thank you all for a fantastic panel. Thank you very much.